My parents divorced when I was 7 years old. I have an older brother who was 9 years old at the time of the divorce. My mom got full custody of us, and we only saw my dad once on the weekends. My mom worked as a waitress, so she did not have a steady income, a solid income. And we struggled a lot, and that's why we moved. When I was about 10 years old, we were constantly being kicked out of the house. We moved into a house that was not in the best part of town. However, it was the biggest and most comfortable house we ever had. It was also very cheap compared to other places we had stayed in previous years. But there were always terrible things going on in this house. For example, the TV in our living room would just turn on and off. One night, my brother and I were lying on the couch in the living room trying to sleep. This was not unusual for us, as we slept there a few nights during our stay. And while we slept, the TV would turn on. Annoyed, I got up, took the TV off the wall, and sleepily crawled back to the couch. A short while later, I heard a faint static sound as the TV restarted. I got up and went to turn off the TV, forgetting that I had done it before. When I realized this, I freaked out and turned the TV off again by pressing the power button. After that, I didn't sleep for a long time that night. Months have passed and I'm lying in my bed. This time I don't try to sleep. I just lay there. It was very quiet in my room when I heard a knock on the window from somewhere. It was like a murder that could have been done with the pad of a finger instead of a fingernail. I jumped out of bed and ran as fast as I could to my brother's room, which was next to mine. I turned on her bedroom light and hysterically tried to explain to her what had happened in my bedroom. A few seconds earlier, I had asked him to let me sleep in the same room as him because I was afraid to stay there. It's nothing. At that time, she agreed. I went to her bed, and after a few minutes, I was already lying there. We heard the same 2 knocks on the window. Without saying a word, we both jumped out of bed and ran to my mother's room. We cried and told him what had just happened, and he fell asleep. He was annoyed that we woke him up. He sighed and said we just had to imagine things, and that Nee should go back to bed. But just as he finished his sentence, someone knocked on his window, as well as mine and my brother's. My mom jumped up and said we could sleep with her that night. Somehow we all managed to sleep that night without any distractions, but it was awful. The second incident happened the summer my brother and I were in high school. My mom worked every day from about 8 to 3. That's why he left us at home. And he was a nice guy then, but he didn't do much. He just watched all night and slept all day. It was early morning and my brother and I were playing hide and seek. Tags. There's quite a lot of them. It's just hide and seek. But when you find a man, you have to tag him before he gets there. Also, we tried to be as quiet as possible so as not to wake up Mom's boyfriend. I was a searcher and found my brother, but before I could tag him, he jumped up and ran. I went outside, chased after him, closed the door behind me, and quickly ran around. At home, my brother came back into the house. He stopped at the door. I noticed him and laughed. "Is that you?" He looked at me confused, and I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me and said the door was locked. I thought he had lost his mind and went to open the door. Sure enough, it was locked, but without a handle. The pen is blocked. It can only be done from the inside. We ran into my mom's bedroom and started banging on the window trying to wake up her boyfriend. He was actually sleeping very soundly. A few hours passed. My mom came home and let us in. My mom also told us that sometimes she would be asleep in bed and hear my brother screaming. He was screaming at her at the top of his voice because he had just seen something horrible. Mom jumped up and ran to her room. I should realize that we were at my dad's house this weekend. He said it happened to him, and many times. One time at 3 in the morning, we were all in our bedrooms. We were just sleeping soundly, but we woke up and found that there was a closet in our closet. We slowly walked out of our rooms. We found all of the Christmas decorations smashed on the floor and stayed there forever. 6 months. and our tubs were neatly stacked in the pantry. We also didn't have a cat or any other animal that could have knocked them over. We also had carpet, not hardwood. So, all that broken jewelry looked very unusual. Well, we cleaned up the pieces and went to bed. The last thing that happened in this house before we moved in was when we were on vacation. My mom had a friend who let us stay with her for a week. He didn't have his own house and was kind of jumping from couch to couch, so it made perfect sense for him to stay. About halfway through, a week later, my mom got a text from him. It read, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay here anymore." My mom went to another room and called him to ask him what was going on. After their conversation, my mom explained to us that her friend was sitting on the bed in the bedroom with the door open and said she heard a noise and saw the door crack open. I saw a little girl looking at him. He said he got up to check it out and thought about it. He imagines things and said so. When he opened the door, he saw a little girl running toward him. She was wearing a white dress and said she was running to the pantry. He explained that she didn't look scared, but she was laughing, and it looked like she was, trying to play hide and seek with him. But after that, he just packed his bags, and he left, and I never saw him again after that. We moved out of that house, and nothing's happened to us since. But oddly enough, yes. But we actually know the people who live in that house. They told us today that strange things have happened to them, but they didn't go into detail. All I can say is that I'm happy that I don't live there anymore. My uncle always told me about the strange things that happened at my grandmother's house when you slept over. But first I'll tell you about my experience, and then mine. I'll try to briefly explain how this house works, which is haunting. My grandmother had 2 miscarriages, a boy and a girl, and her husband Akma was my grandfather. He died around the time it all started. My uncle told me about the potty events. They woke up in the middle of the night seeing shadows and objects. But what he remembered most was when he was cooking. It was around 10 p.m. When he asked my little cousin if he wanted something to eat. The living room was right downstairs. The hall. He heard the answer from the kitchen. Yes. So she started cooking and asked if she wanted him to bring it to her so she would pass out once more. Yes. He takes offense again and carries the plate into the hall. In the living room, he finds a dead woman on the couch, wakes her up, asks if he's talked to her in the meantime, and she says no. Why not? The fact that he's risen again is so obvious. It sends shivers down my spine. In my experience, my cousin and I spent the night together at my grandmother's house to keep her company and not be alone. So he shouldn't be alone. But we went out for a smoke and then went back inside to finally get some sleep. He slept upstairs, and I turned on the TV so there wouldn't be any background noise and passed out on the couch. It was about 2 a.m. when I woke up to whispering people from the kitchen. As a reminder, I was asleep. On the couch in the living room, which is at the end of the kitchen hallway. So me, a curious 17-year-old. Rahem, at the time. I decided to see who woke up and what they did. The closer I got, I went into the kitchen. The louder the whispers got. And when I got into the kitchen, the whispering stopped. The whispering stopped, and I was alone with the sound of my breathing. I keep walking. I could have sworn I heard people talking in here, I thought to myself. I decide to take a look, going around the whole house to make sure the whispers weren't coming from another room, but after every room empty, I decided to just brush it off and sit on the couch. I only made it halfway down the hallway, but made it to the living room. When I heard the whispering again, I didn't understand a word of it. It sounded like a group of people talking to each other in a low voice. I decided to turn around one last time, but the murmuring stopped again. I was alone in the kitchen again. At this point, I was going crazy. Pretty hard, but I just decided to sleep, to make this night clear sooner. When I returned to the living room for the 3rd time, I heard the whispers again, behind me. This time, I didn't even look back and just decided to bypass it as best I could by turning on the TV, and after a while I fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told everyone what had happened, and honestly, no one was surprised. My grandmother's house has a bad reputation. So there you go. I'm still wondering where those rumors came from. I don't know what happened that night, but I can't help but think that's what happened. Spirits or something. When I was about 11 years old, I used to have horrible nightmares all the time. About a scary character, actually. And they always started the same way. I did something that made me very happy. Although I don't remember those moments or the highlights of that feeling very well. Something happened. Something out of a slasher. I was afraid of everything. Bloody or treacherous as a kid. I remember brother and sister made me sit down to watch an episode of The Host to normalize that humor for me. But in this episode, Peter and Chicken got into a fight. And it was very bloody and violent. And I was just at a loss for words. That's why I'm saying this. You know, I worry easily. Then. But now, let's go back to sleep. After that, something very pleasant began to end with a loud bass. A touch filled the air, and a fear that I can only describe as primal swept all around me. The expressions on their faces made me break down and cry. I closed my eyes and heard the carnage around me. Blood was pouring in rivers. My head ached. Screams and shrieks shattered to pieces. And it was, just honestly, like that. And after a while I was listening to my friends and family being killed, the bass stopped and I heard it. Someone was running quietly, laughing to themselves, like a child running away. Hide, or something like that. And then I heard complete silence as their feet slowly lowered to the carpet or any surface. This dream usually happened in different places. It always stopped when they got close to my back, at least 3 feet behind me. But I don't know why. And after an agonizing silence, they would talk, but there was always another sentence. Here are some of them that I remember. It was, "I'm sorry." Yes, we've all heard it. I like my name, but let's just say, Rob, I'm sorry. I'm busy, and one that sound will speak more eloquently than words. Is it Sunday? And says something along the same lines. Sometimes, but, I can't remember now. His voice sounded like an old man's and made it deeper. But he also spoke in a childish tone or just a bit silly. It wasn't too deep and a little scratched. After that, I woke up at about 2 or 4 in the morning. When I was up all night, I woke up really late. That's how it all happened. For a little while, probably 2 or 3 months. But when you do stuff like this, it usually seems longer. Plus it was a long time ago, so maybe it was shorter, but I'm not sure. But it didn't end suddenly. I had fewer and fewer dreams. I was very restless as a child, and it changed me. It didn't change me. Shay person or something. After that, I became much more serious and paranoid. It's finally gone. Now, I'm moving on to my real-life experience. So, it was about 2 years ago. I think I lived in an apartment building with my mom and just went to the movies. The 3 of us, my 3 friends, didn't really like the movie, and we left the house early. We were here. And on the way back, we all collapsed on the bedroom furniture. As we sat down and turned on the TV for our friends, I heard a muffled conversation behind me. But my mom was home, so I didn't think it was a big deal. We added a paranormal show because we really liked that movie. But really, we just sat around and talked and mostly joked around. Honestly, it was a good night, and I liked the girl who was my friend. And we really talked all night. But in the middle of our jokes about the movie, I heard my mom call me. I calmed my friend down and stopped the movie and shouted, "What, no answer for me?" So I shouted louder, "What?" Again, there was no answer. I then got up and walked towards the exit of the house. I wanted to walk down the hallway to my mother's room to express my displeasure that I had to get up and see her. I stopped in the hallway because I heard a strange hoarse sound behind me. The voice repeated itself. I realized it was coming from the bathroom. I screamed. "Mom, you're in the bathroom," and my friend's nares. And then I recognized the voice. And then I remembered that my mom was spending the night in Chico, and I stopped. And I'm sure I had the same one, just like the ones I remembered in my dream. My friends thought my mom was really close, like I had just seen her. I had just gotten out of the shower or something. But then a voice spoke loud enough for them to hear. I'll never forget what it said. It was chaos, but the voice said, "Yes, I'll take today, and then I'll tear you in half. And how will Rob know? And I won't. How to forget?" During this conversation, I kept telling my friends we had to leave, so I ran out, and they looked at me confused and bewildered. That last word was the last word. I ran out the door, and I'm sure it will continue. I ran outside and called my mother, and she told me to call the police. I did. They came and did the usual, and then they just left. Apparently there was nothing in the house. They told us it was late, but that didn't mean it was. They weren't our neighbors, and I wanted to believe that too. But I swear, it sounded exactly like what I'd heard as a kid. And I swear, it was gonna happen. It's in my bathroom. Well, afterward, my friends told me it was okay, and, they all went home, hiding how scared they were. They were probably trying to get to know me better, or something. Mine knew too, because my best friend had to stay with me. But all of a sudden, my mom needed her. Something to do when you're 12. That night, I started dreaming about that night again, and I forced myself to wake up at the right moment. I heard that bass. I ran to the light and didn't sleep for the next week and a half, but I haven't had that dream since. This may sound crazy, but, I know I've heard this thing in my house, and I'm sure my friends have heard it too. Let me start off by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm 19 years old, currently living in the UK. I used to be extremely skeptical of all things supernatural. Ghosts and demons. And all these stories never scared me, because I can usually convince myself of a rational explanation. Lately, though, strange things have been happening to me. The experience that seems to have changed my mind isn't about ghosts or anything like that, and about aliens. You see, I've always had an underlying fear. A fear of gray aliens, but not extreme phobia or arachnophobia, where Cassiers can't see or hear for fear of their creatures. I'm actually very interested in the concept of aliens, and I want to believe that they are real and that we are not alone in the universe. But something about the idea of gray aliens gives me a strong sense of fear and despair when I think about them. I can't sleep without watching them in my life. Or I'm faced with something I can't get past. I have trouble falling asleep too. No sounds to disturb me and help me fall asleep without thinking. About 3 months ago, I experienced night terrors for the first time. They were frequent with my father, who had suffered from them for many years. However, his nightmares were common. The funny thing was that he saw strange things, like my grandmother's eyes glowing with neon, which kept him awake and screaming all night. Tonight, the horrors were very different. I went to bed with my girlfriend and fell asleep. I remember every part of the dream just as I did in reality. I'm working in the same clothes, in the same sleeping position, my curtains in the same position and everything else. The curtains were slightly ajar, so it was very hard for me to fall asleep. But I didn't fight. I don't want to make a fuss in front of him and look like an idiot. My boy who can't sleep, because he's afraid of even the slightest outward sign. Take this, son. The only thing that happened in the dream was that I saw a face in the middle of the window crack. It didn't move or blink. It just hung there and looked at me. Whatever it wasn't a person. Its face was long, almost shaped like a slice of pizza or something. Round on top and thin on the bottom. Maybe the curtains held it up, but no more than that. I saw E as much. As much as I wanted to see, his eyes were, frankly, big, too big, black as black. No students, no movement, just them. But I knew he was watching me. Too much so. I felt the same sense of dread that I felt in front of strangers. The feeling of a racing heartbeat and the inability to move, and fear of what might be waiting for me around me. I was hyperventilating at every turn. In fact, this is the same hyperventilation I experienced at the end of the dream. My girlfriend woke me up, terrified of what had happened to me. But I just turned it into a nightmare. From that point on, strange things started happening in the house. Was in the house. My family had reported strange occurrences in the past, but my lack of experience led me to believe they were explainable. Strange things that are simple. Happened for a reason, or something like a lack of balance or an outside wind. The usual. My mother claimed to have seen a man looking at her from our living room door. However, I didn't. When he looked out there, he and my brother's girlfriend had the same dream the same night, talking to the twin girls in their bed. My brother and sister claimed I saw it. Shadows were passing by the doors, and my father claimed that the curtains moved on their own and the windows weren't open. I never believed these claims until my experiences that night. The horror. Strange things started happening around the house that frankly terrified me. Objects were flying from a direction we couldn't see but couldn't fall. Whole pounds of books fell to the floor, even though they were lying completely on their sides and not over the edge. During the night, a loud noise was heard from the ground floor which startled our animals and sounded like a gunshot. But nothing moved during the investigation. Because I live in the UK, it's very difficult to get and as far as I know, no one in our area even owns a gun, let alone a shooting in the house. Our cat also looks at things that don't exist, that just don't exist. Follow them around the room, eyes wide open. Appearance. No one has knocked on our back door, which is all glass. You mean we can see everyone who does. Also, there are constant malfunctions in our equipment. The lights keep flickering, the bulbs have only been on for a few weeks, and the Wi-Fi in our house doesn't work. Inefficient. Despite constant upgrades and expansions, it feels like something is holding things back. Electrical signals, especially in my room. I plugged the cable directly into the router, which connects to the Xbox 2 floors above, which I was just pulled out from under the door, despite being everywhere but my room, wrapped up so tightly that it would be hard to get it out anywhere. Except, it would end in failure. However, the strange experience was evident. When we heard a knock on the back door, I lazily retreated to my room to just play video games, and the light on the landing went out again, meaning it wasn't there. Not the others. There was light upstairs in the rooms. It came on when the door closed, and suddenly there was a blue flash. Like it came from my room, almost as if someone had just used a very powerful flashlight, which filled the entire floor. For a second, even though my door was completely closed. I don't know what it means, and I'll try to explain it. But I feel that every event continues. Take me back to that night terror with the face that scared me to death. Even as I write, I feel that terror. I can't keep calm, and I feel like something is peeking around every corner and watching my every moment. I just want to find out what it is. Honestly, if it's psychological, what can I do to fix it? I don't know. If they're aliens, I believe they are. But I feel horror when I see that face. These events and my previous feelings about aliens are one and the same, and I want to know what. What can I do to stop it? When this story happened, I was about 13 years old. My parents divorced when I was very young, and my mother had to take care of me and my sister, and my mom is very honest and thorough in doing her job. So, he liked to clean offices and houses for money. My sister and I would often go with her to clean, and by the time this story happened, we were pretty used to it. My mom had 3 buildings that she cleaned regularly, and we came up with nicknames for them. The main building, the red building, and the brick Ciara building. I know we had to clean all of them, 3 buildings tonight, so we started with the red building. But that goes for all the places I helped. My mom's was my least favorite. I hated going there. From the outside, it seemed normal. But every time I went in, I felt depressed and anxious. It was like the whole meaning of life had been sucked out of the world, and I just wanted to sleep. It had been a long time since we'd been in the Red Building at that time. The observation room had a bathroom that needed to be cleaned. The observation room was usually locked, and I was never there. The first thing my sister and I noticed was the wall of screens, each with a picture from the surveillance cameras. They were all over the building. But we had fun playing with the monitors, forcing one of us to stay inside, at the observation station. Everyone else was in another room, making faces and filming something. I'd also like to mention that I have a close relationship with my sister, and we've always been weirdos. We both laugh at jokes and silly things. We also enjoy scaring others. Our mother, after getting angry at us for pranks, gave us both jobs. After about an hour and a half of washing and vacuuming, we were almost done, and my mom had a break. My sister was hanging out somewhere nearby. At this point, I was really tired. I just wanted to lay around or do something other than work. When I looked over at my mom, she was rubbing water with a mop. When he asked if I wanted to poop or go upstairs to turn off the lights, I was so tired I just wanted to lie down and work. I was so exhausted that all I could think about was not working. So I decided to turn off the light. And I walked up the narrow stairs to the kitchen. The location of the top floor was strange. It used to be an apartment building, but there are 2 staircases on opposite sides of the building. I went up, the ones in the kitchen. Another set was in the front doorway. At the top of those stairs was this hallway, which I always try to avoid. I started turning off the lights one by one and thought to myself that we still had 2 buildings to clear. I had to pull myself together. I shut myself off from the outside world and flicked the switches easily. But as soon as I stepped out into the hallway, I tried to avoid it. I became a little more aware of what I was doing. I have been afraid of the dark since childhood. I started turning off the lights in the offices down the hall. I happily turned it off. When I turned on the hallway light, I jumped down a small staircase. Playing. Door in the middle of the hallway. The ceiling in the hall was very high. Right. The light switch was actually just a rope hanging from it. I grabbed the rope with my hand and pulled, and as soon as the room went dark, I freaked out. Just then I heard a low growl behind me. It was like watching a man die. Of course, the body relaxes or something, so all the air comes out of my lungs as soon as I heard it. My whole body tensed up with fear and adrenaline, and I started to sweat. That's what it seemed like to me when I turned around. I'm dying or something like that, I saw. I looked back. Everything was consuming me. I felt so helpless and scared, and I didn't know what to think. If I stayed there any longer, I was going to be in pain. My body took over my mind thanks to the adrenaline, and I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. I ran straight to the observation room, hoping my sister was there, and called her name. There was no answer. I was so desperate and scared that I ran over to the monitors and started scanning to see if anyone was near me, anyone possible. The first movement I saw was on the screen showing the stairs I had just descended, and I saw my little sister coming down it, and Boba Fett in a hat with a mop. I took a deep breath and lay down on the couch in the observation room. I was really glad it was my sister. I knew he was just scaring me with that. He always did that. And it was beautiful. Significance. I thought he was sweeping the kitchen, and then he followed me up the stairs and took the opportunity to scare me. When I calmed down, I went into the kitchen where I saw my mom and sister. As they were talking, I leaned my elbow on the island counter and told the nurse that she had scared me. He looked at me and asked me what I was repeating, and he asked when he scared me. I told her that he came up behind me when I turned off the light, and I laughed and asked if I looked stupid. I ran down the stairs. Both my mother and sister didn't laugh, but looked at me with confused faces. They looked at me with a confused face. Then I asked them who the nurse had started talking to. That he was talking to his mother downstairs at the time. I went to turn off the lights. I told him that I knew he was lying. I lied because I saw him on the cameras. Going down the stairs, I described what I saw. Hold the mop. And that he was wearing both a hat and a coat. And then my mom told me that my sister was gone. Lied that they were actually talking. That's when I started to think my mom was in on the joke too. He's in on the joke too. So I told my sister to follow me into the observation room and pointed to the screen. I saw him come down the stairs, and then he told me he took off his coat. As soon as we walked in, I didn't put it back on because he'd just come down those stairs too. Once with a mop. But that was much earlier. I was confused, a little scared, and as we packed up and got in the car, my sister told me what a bicep was. I had never known what they were before, nor had I heard any stories about them. This only added to my horror. Honestly, I thought through every possible way I could think of. Rationalized it, but nothing made sense. At first I thought the tape wasn't live. But then I remembered my sister and I playing with cameras. Or maybe I was just paranoid about the dark. But I do know this. What I felt was real. I still don't quite understand what happened, and I wonder what would have happened if I had turned instead of running. But I didn't. I know some people might not believe me, but I appreciate people who don't think I'm crazy because they've been through the same thing. So, my father has experienced many strange and paranormal phenomena in his life. Currently. But one incident that is really memorable to him happened in 1982 when he was 13 years old and still living in the Philippines. He was attending school at Christ the King Missionary Seminary in Quezon City. This is a Roman Catholic institution that prepares students for the priesthood. Apparently, my father didn't make it. The rest of the program. Thank God he admitted that he never really wanted to be a priest. A priest. And going to seminary was just a way for him to live a more independent life. And this story probably helped change some of his mind. So my father and his friends, John, Rob, Richard, and Nick, went to seminary. Seminary, but none of them became priests. Anyway, all this happened because when Nick got the flu, he was once quarantined in a seminary hospital. It was standard procedure to make sure other students didn't get sick. And frankly, no one thought about it. 2 days later, he was released. But later, it got weird. My father explained it. Nick came back acting abnormal, staying healthy and just being quiet, instead of laughing and joking in the message room. Sometimes he would just stay quiet with his head down. Sometimes I would just stare out the window, not looking at anyone or talking to anyone. One day at lunch, my dad and the rest of the group noticed that Nick had tears running down his face as he just quietly cried at the table. This bothered my father and his friends. I reported it to one of the seminary leaders, something like a youth director, and the Nick was invited to the regional office, but the group turned him away. When they asked what happened to Nick and if he was okay, the district explained it. After asking Nick what happened and if he was okay, Nick finally admitted that there was a man there, a person who was stalking me, and I didn't want to say anything because I thought no one would believe me. Nick was then asked to describe the man following him and explained that he was wearing jeans, but he was shirtless and apparently had no face. According to Ruler, after Nick described what the man looked like, he got worried, panicked, cried, and yelled something in the neighborhood. I really don't want to see him again. Please, I don't want to see him. Just help me. Please help me. A neighborhood with a prefect who was something like a principal. The priest, who was also in the office, had to restrain Nick because he was totally confused. After prayer, they were able to calm Nick down and tell him that they are always there to help if he needs anything. If he needed anything, someone would always come to his aid, after which he would be kicked out of the office. Although my dad was concerned about what was happening, at first he thought it might have been due to overexertion, making his friend explode or something like that. However, it should also be noted that the existence of spirits, demons, and other malicious beings came as no surprise to the seminarians. New students were always warned at the beginning that since the seminary was a house of reformation and the students were preparing for the arrival of hostile parties. Wishing to expel students was normal and expected. Common and expected. By the way, my father and the rest of the group gave Nick a place to stay for the next 2 days. A few days. Figuring she just wanted to be alone for a while until she felt like she belonged. That's how it was until tonight, when everything fell into place. Everyone was in their dorms now. Nick, my dad, and their friend Richard were sitting side by side on their beds. Everyone had put up their mosquito nets and got ready for bed. Nick's sudden scream startled everyone. He shouted, "Get away from me!" According to his father, his shout was followed by 2 aggressive outbursts. Nick tried to fight off the unseen attacker. And what happened next? My father still doesn't know what to believe. He saw Nick's head snap back as if he'd been punched in the jaw, and then his whole body was thrown violently into the air. But my father is religious, but still pretty skeptical, and he claims that this is how Nick's body was thrown back. It was sincere, not bending his knees to justify his jumping backwards, if it was all in his head. Then my dad said that Nick was a very good actor, but the night got even weirder when Nick was attacked by an invisible force. He lost consciousness, and immediately the governor was summoned, followed by the prefect priest. Together they took Nick to the governor's office. He was as worried and afraid as his father had been. John and Rob followed them, partly out of concern, but mostly out of just plain stupid curiosity. Website. The theater doors slammed shut behind them, and Dad immediately regretted showing such curiosity. There was incredible tension and fear in the room. You could see it even in the priest's face. Even from the priest's face, it could be seen that he was cautious and wanted nothing to do with Nick and the potential demon. The ruler, prefect, and priest have decided on my father and the group. I will stay here to pray for him and help him come to his senses. And they quickly follow the instructions and get to work. Praying a prayer of prayer, as if the night wasn't scary enough, is a prayer of welcome halfway through. Maria, my father John's friend, begins to speak. Utter nonsense, and what my father could explain was speaking in tongues. John leaves right after this mess. Luckily, the priest managed to catch him and put him on the floor before he hit his head on something. My father is just confused, and he regrets terribly that he didn't decide to go to the damn seminary in the first place. That way, he could have just been safe at home and not watched episodes of Three's Company with his dad. Of course, all they could do in that moment was pray and hope. Things would get better. Soon, John regained consciousness as if nothing had happened. My father asked him what made him say that, to which John replied meaningfully, "I don't know. They are ready." After a while, they prayed, and Nick was still unconscious and thought the group had done all they could. To help the ruler, the prefect and the priests agreed that the boy should go back to the dormitory and get some sleep. Tell them that Nick will stay with them in the office for the night, presumably to stay awake and pray. On over him, and perhaps call a doctor. The group complied and returned to the dormitory, joining other students who were just as frightened and unable to sleep because of the night's turn of events. My father's friend Reggie, whose bed was next to his bed, humbly asked if they could share a bed. She was afraid to be alone, and her father agreed. Dad remembers he and Reggie shaking so much with fear that he could hear the bed shaking. But now he laughs, even though he was very uncomfortable at the time. The next morning, Nick's parents took him out of seminary for 2 weeks, and apparently when he came back for 2 weeks, 2 weeks later, Nick was back to his usual way of life, and it was no longer on the agenda after that. After these events, when my dad and his friends left the seminary, Nick had a falling out with the group over personal issues. Personal issues, and that's why my dad doesn't hang out with them anymore. But John is still a close family friend, and my dad occasionally reminisces with him about the story. He thought extreme anxiety or paranoia and all that was a possible explanation for what happened at the seminar. Those are just theories, though. They really don't get along very well, and my dad still can't explain it. I mean, the fact that he had the flu and all that can be explained. Maybe he had a little bit of it, some sort of hallucinations. But my dad describes a night where he felt like he'd been punched, pushed, and tossed in the air. Or whatever it was. Him. He still wonders that question. I'm from Canada, Alberta, and what I can tell you is that I have to keep things as secret as possible. As much as possible. I worked at this nursing home for about 1.5 years as a cleaner and caterer. Now, I usually work shifts as a janitor, but lately strange things have been happening to me. Strange things have been happening, and the longer I work here, the more they progress. And the weird stuff is happening in one part of the building in particular, on purpose. I can assure you it's the truth. I was skeptical of such things, until I started working here. So, that's where it all started. I came in for the late shift like any other day. But remember, I'm pregnant too. In these stories, late shifts include cleaning the cafeteria and kitchen, as well as laundry. A whole day's worth of laundry in one day. But remember, this is a very big old establishment, and I work the late shift alone. There are 2 dining rooms that can seat at least 70 people, 1 kitchen, and 1 laundry room with large industrial washers and dryers. So there's always plenty of cleaning. Shai was doing my usual thing, sweeping the floors in the first dining hall. Suddenly, I smelled him. A very unpleasant odor. And it made me sick. I thought maybe the cooks had left some rotten meat in the trash can. It's possible, but to my surprise, all the trash cans had been cleaned out. I went back to the dining room. I wanted to see where the odor was coming from. So I followed the smell downstairs, past the kitchen and down the hallway where the rooms are. This was the east wing of the building, and there were only 5 people living in the building. And that's including our laundry room. This wing is the oldest wing that has not yet been renovated. Therefore, many of the rooms are empty. I followed the smell down the hallway. Always an empty room at the end of the hallway. And I knew no one lived there. I knew everyone, and where they all lived. The number of this room is 218, and you can easily smell the foul odor coming from the door. I think the cleaners left a garbage bag of rotting food or something in there this morning. They often leave things behind after cleaning. So there's no problem, I thought. I'll throw it out myself, but because of our facility's fire safety policy, I had the master key that unlocked all the rooms. I opened the door and the room and the smell hit me and I almost threw up. As I entered the room and immediately felt a noticeable change in temperature. It felt like the air conditioning had been running in that room all day, and I felt awful and dizzy. The entire time I was in there, I wanted to leave immediately. I quickly searched the room for anything that could emit that horrible odor, and got confused. When everything was there was an empty closet and a bathroom. I thought it might be a dead animal stuck in the wall, and I need to leave a note for my supervisor. My kick opened the door, and it began, down the hallway. Suddenly I heard a very loud banging on the door. A shiver ran through my body as I turned to the door and made sure no one was there. And then heard the knocking again, but this time much louder, twice as loud, at the door. And I went as pale as the pregnant and shy girl I was. I just ran down the hallway as fast as I could. I didn't know what or who or what the hell had happened in this room. But I felt like I had reason to be afraid. I quickly went back to the kitchen and died. 911. On the phone. I was sure someone had broken into the house and laughed at me. I told the operator it was a possible robbery, and they told me the police were there. On patrol. 2 minutes passed. I sighed happily and waited at the front door. When the police finally arrived, I explained everything. When I showed him what the room was, he walked down the hallway, cleaned up and announced that no one had been found and the room was still locked. Even the windows were still intact and, according to him, there was no odor. There was. Wes. I was stunned by this because just a few minutes ago, I could have sworn I smelled rotting flesh and heard a thumping sound. I decided it was my fatigue and my pregnant brain. He took the report and moved on, but I felt very uncomfortable. Noli finishing my shift. But that was the first time I'd ever encountered anything paranormal. The second time I came in on the late shift. One night on the late shift, I was in the restroom. Right after the last part of my shift was over, I folded my clothes and wondered. Now this room has very large windows, but it's late and dark. You can see your reflection and the space around you, even through the dark windows. I looked at the laundry room and looked up again, and my heart stopped when I saw an old man with black dark eyes, who just looked at me with a smile. I screamed and looked around, thinking the tenant was mocking me, and to my horror there was no one there. There was no one there. Looking around, I felt very uncomfortable and looked down the hallway, but there was no one there either. There was no one there either. I said hello, but there was no response. After that, I felt sick. I finished the laundry, locked the laundry, and when I closed the door, I saw an old man standing at the end of the hallway. On the edge of it, I turned around to look. It was the same man who had been standing behind me a few minutes ago. He smiled, his eyes were gray-black. I noticed that he was not known. A tall, heavy-set man dressed in jeans and a tight white t-shirt. He was bald and obviously old. He just stood there and smiled at me. That smile gave me goosebumps, and also down my spine. And I thought maybe we had a new tenant, but my manager just forgot to mention it. Mention it or something, and I'll yell at him. Hello, sir. You need something? Belande. I work the night shift. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance. I did it with a lot of excitement, but he just stood there and smiled. If you need anything, don't be shy. Call my private number. Okay, I'll be there soon. I was very happy. I felt awkward and wanted to go back to the teacher's lounge, and he was just standing there, still smiling. I smiled back, waved nervously, and said, "Good night, sir." Call me if you need anything. Okay. I left quickly, just like I came in. Back to the staff room. The phone started beeping. I looked at the caller. ID and calling from the number 218. I felt uneasy, but it was probably just a new tenant or something. Maybe he was just uncomfortable talking to me. I didn't know, but I hesitated and finally answered. "Good day, sir. What can I do for you tonight?" There was a deep, nasty pissing sound on the other end of the phone, and it was completely inaudible. Man, that was scary. And then the phone just went silent. Hey, I said. I nervously dialed the number and sat down. I don't know how long. My heart was pounding in my throat because security protocols. I had to leave. Also, check on the resident, no matter how much my intuition was telling me to avoid him. I walked nervously down the east wing. My heart was pounding in my ears. I walked up to room 218, knocked on the door, and asked if everything was okay. There was nothing wrong with the man, but there was no answer. Then I knocked again, but there was still no answer, and I was worried. What if something had attacked my tenant and the growling wasn't really artificial? But I was pregnant. Besides, I was pregnant, and I didn't want to barge in and get attacked by who the hell knows what. So I turned around to pick up the phone, in the private room. Just then, I heard the door slowly open behind me. I slowly walked to the door and said before opening it, "Hi, sir, are you all right?" At that moment, I pushed the door open. I was expecting someone or something to jump on me. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. There was no one in the room. There were no things to indicate that someone lived here. It was completely empty, but I had an eerie feeling that I was being watched, so I searched the room. And the smell of rotting flesh filled my nose again. And then I heard the most horrible laugh. It stabbed into my ears like knives. It was such a deep, shallow, and just plain ridiculous laugh. I literally laughed and ran out of the room so fast. I didn't even bother to close the door. And as I ran, I thought to myself, am I going crazy? I could have sworn it happened. There was no one there. I don't think I saw anyone. What the hell is going on? That night I finished my shift quickly and left early. I didn't really care. Wait a while longer, but unfortunately it didn't end there. But here's why. As a single mom-to-be and pregnant, I had no choice but to stay here until my maternity leave. My husband died a few months ago when he was hit by a drunk driver. He was supposed to come home in the evening, cook a meal, do a positive pregnancy, and everything else, and he didn't even know it. However, he became a father. I was there for a while. I'm going to stop here. If you want to know more about my experience, be sure to leave a comment below. I'm sure I'll have plenty to share. Thanks for listening. So, I live in the UK. I'm 21 years old. I work in B&B, and I'm used to it by now. You have to welcome the weird. However, at the end of the day, they are mostly harmless. But last week's experience was the most horrifying and terrifying. It all started on Monday night last week. It was the end of summer vacation, so there were a lot of tourists around. To your region. It was good business for B&B. One of the 7 rooms I stayed in was occupied by a foreign couple with a baby. 2 girls from Australia lived in another room, and a single man lived in the attic. To be honest, from the first time I met him, I had a bad feeling about him. He was tall, with long, greasy hair and dirty fingernails. Dirty, uncleaned fingernails and all. He looked very insecure. He didn't say too much. He just asked what room he was staying in, and he went in, and he closed the door behind him. I don't think there's anything unusual here, but unfortunately it didn't stop. I now spend most of my time in my private hobby room. I watch TV most of the day, and then I just go upstairs to my bedroom to sleep. I walked up the tall stairs and went to my room. I looked at my alarm clock and it was only 9:30 p.m., so I thought, I'm going to make it. I just lay there and watched a video on my computer. In the middle of watching my favorite movie, I was interrupted by a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a normal knock, but a very aggressive one. I looked through the peephole and inside the door and was surprised to see that it was the strange man who had stopped. In the attic bedroom. I opened the door and he started talking directly to me. He told me that the water pipe in his room had burst and water was pouring everywhere without saying a word to me. Janta wants me to fix it. I apologized to him, of course, and without asking anything. I let him take me to his attic room. The first warning sign was that he closed the door and locked it behind him. The next sign was that the water was nowhere to be found. And then, I remember that there were actually no pipes in the attic. I don't know how I forgot, but I was probably more concerned about the guy asking for a refund and questioning his eligibility. The legality of this burst pipe thing. But now I'm stuck. And the people staying at the hotel lived 2 floors below me, so they never heard my screams. I'm a woman too, so I didn't have a chance to fight this guy. I looked at him, and he shot me. Yellow smile, and he ran toward me, but I bounced to the side. I noticed something sticking out of his jacket pocket. It was the handle of a knife. He grabbed it out of his pocket and started sweeping the air. With that knife, I jumped out and heard him run after me at high speed until we reached the 2nd floor, where I heard him run back to his room. I looked into my room and called the police immediately. I also called the other guests and told them to lock their doors and stay in their rooms. When they arrived, they found the man hiding in a closet in his room. I guess he got scared when he heard the sirens and just hid there. Apparently, he only had one backpack. In it was a toothbrush, duct tape, a Stanley knife, a Phillips screwdriver, and some intimate stuff that I can't even write about. But I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. They never found out what he was going to do to me, though. From the contents of his bag, we all guessed, but they took him away in handcuffs. Fortunately, I never saw the man again. I'm moving soon, because I don't feel good about him knowing where I live. And every day, all I see is the smile he gave me and his wild eyes. This is definitely the scariest experience I've ever had. It's a story my mom told me about her childhood. I told it in my own words. But I didn't change any of the details. Didn't change any details of the event. So that's it. Memories are a strange thing. Every time you think about them, you distort them a little bit. And years later, your memory become a distorted version of what really happened. It's like a high school play. The phone where you whisper something to the person next to you, and then they whisper to the person next to you what you think you said, and so on. And when it reaches you, the sentence that was spoken is like this. Has nothing to do with the original announcement. I have often thought about how different my childhood was from that time. When I think back on it, how many details have I changed? How many things do I remember? Things that might not have happened. It didn't really happen. I am quite accepting that things are not as I think they are, and that's fine with me. But one memory haunts me with clear and precise strokes. Couples are fun. How simple the ones you'd rather forget seem. I refuse to lose clarity. The memory I'm talking about happened. October 1986, not far from Dallas, Texas. I still remember my dress. It was yellow with white polka dots, long sleeves, and up to my ankles, as my parents' religious principles demanded. Requirements. I hated that dress, but at 11 years old, my parents didn't think I could pick the right outfit. I hated it because it was pretty tight, and my mom sewed it herself, and it was pretty tight in the middle. My sister, who was a little older than me, had just gotten her driver's license and wanted to start driving. My mother. He said it would be possible if he took me along, and he agreed. I took the keys and we hit the road. We left around 6 o'clock-ish, and it was getting dark. But my sister, who was little, uncomfortable, after driving, wanted to go in the evening so there would be less traffic. But we also stayed on the side of the road and on smaller roads until we reached a relatively deserted stretch of road. So off we went, just listening to the radio and getting our first real taste of freedom. Freedom. For about an hour, we circled back and forth about 10 miles on the highway USHV 80. It's between Mesquite and Fournette, Texas, just outside of Dallas. It's a little denser now, but back then it was just a 10-mile strip of trees and railroad tracks. And that's when we heard the roar of the engine and my sister's voice. Driving skills. This was evident when the car drove a few hundred feet and then stopped and stalled. Out of gas, and the nearest gas station was a few kilometers away. This was before the advent of cell phones, so that was the only thing. All we had to do was get a gas tank out of the trunk and drive back to the station. Remember this. Badly tailored polka dot dress, stained clothes. Well, this is where it comes in handy. After walking about 100 meters, turns out it's more trouble than it's worth. Hobley. I follow my sister for a few kilometers, so he gave me the keys and told me to wait in the car. I got back in the car, locked all the doors, and just stared out the back window until my sister left. I was a very modest, shy, and easily frightened girl back then, and the darkness didn't immediately penetrate my psyche. Penetrated my psyche. But the streetlights weren't on, and I hadn't seen a single car since my sister left. My sister was gone. The only light came from the moon, which was so full that I could see a thick row of trees about 30 meters from the road. After an eternity spent in darkness, my fear and nerves started to kick in fear, and nerves began to give way. There was complete silence, not even crickets chirping. I was acutely aware of how oppressive the silence was. I wanted it to end, but at the same time I was afraid of how it might end. So I just sat there, almost expecting to hear a man whisper in the wind. All I could think about was dreaming. And hopefully, by the time I wake up, my sister's back. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes, and I tried my best to block out thoughts of that bastard. Another 15 minutes passed as I tossed back and forth, looking for a comfortable position. It was at its peak. A scary feeling pervaded these throes. I felt that I was not alone. There was a sense of unshakable fear that I was being watched. I lay on my side, facing the steering wheel and staring at the floor. Back to the traveler, The window. My eyes were tightly closed, and I was afraid to open them. I was afraid of what he doesn't see, of what he sees. Perhaps in reality. I took a deep breath, counted to 3, opened my eyes, and nothing was there. I still took a deep breath and took a quick glance at the driver. The side window and the exhaust. I didn't see anything there either. There's nothing wrong with you. Is everything okay? I said to myself. I sat with my eyes open and stared straight ahead of me, focused on the steering wheel, for another 10 minutes at least, when suddenly, quite unexpectedly, a paralyzing sense of urgency came over me, and the voice in my head started repeating itself. Don't turn around. My heart began to beat frantically. My chest grew faster, my body tensed up, and my limbs became so heavy as if in panic. Wait. I tried to convince myself that it was all just in my head and nothing was happening. Outside the window, I just started to turn around, but to my horror, a shadow appeared from the window. A shadow Vari slid out of the driver's seat and filled it again. 3 smacks on the glass followed. Behind me, that shadow had covered the seat even earlier. I even opened my eyes. I had hardly blinked since I opened them. That is, who or whatever was outside the car. I just stood there staring at myself until the horrible thought occurred to me. But this time there were 3 louder thumps, and I realized I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled myself together and answered the phone. "Hi," I whispered nervously, trying to focus my eyes on the figure outside the window. "Aren't you too young to be here alone, miss? Where are your parents?" His voice was deep and commanding. As he spoke, a chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, the air turned cold and the night became ominous. The man was unusually tall. The top of the window was clearly below his bust line. His arms were very muscular, and his fingers were... While I was trying to focus my gaze, she leaned over to look through her huge, thin window. It was clean-shaven and exposed extremely sunken cheeks and hollows. His eyes themselves were puffy and seemed too big for his face. Too big for his face. And even though it was only night, I could have sworn they were completely black. "Little girl," he repeated. I asked where your parents were. "I'm with my sister, Nas." He interrupted me, and he took a flashlight and shined it on the car. "I can't understand you. I have to offers to roll down the window. It's okay, I'm the police." The diffused light from the streetlights let me see that he was indeed dressed in an officer's uniform, and for a moment I calmed down. I rolled down the window and spoke a little louder. My sister and I parted ways, and she went to get gas. I couldn't go with her because I can't walk around in that dress. A slight smile appeared on his face. "Ah, I see. So you're not here alone." "Alone," he said almost cheerfully. "Yes, sir, until my sister comes back." "When will he be back?" "The nearest train station is a few kilometers away, which may take some time." My weight loss began to fade. The familiar feeling of immediate fear returned. I don't know. He's been here for hours. Maybe, he said. "I'll tell you what. Why don't you come with me? With me so we can go get your sister. You don't have to go. How does that sound?" It hadn't occurred to me, but I suddenly realized I hadn't seen the headline in 20 years. I turned to look out the back window and shuddered. I made sure there were no cars visible in any direction. "But where's your police car?" I asked almost hesitantly. "Over there, behind the trees." He pointed. "Have you ever wanted to drive a police car? I think I should wait here for my sister's return. She won't stay long. Look, there's a curfew. And if you don't come home, I'm gonna have to arrest you. Your parents don't like it when you get arrested." Now there's a new fear in my 11-year-old brain. I'm afraid I'm going to get arrested. My intuition was telling me not to go outside. "I'm sorry, sir," I said as I rolled down the window. The window. I really should have waited for my sister because the window was a few inches from closing. She raised her fingers, trying to stop me, and I slammed them between the door and the glass. She cried out in pain and pulled on his hands. "You little girl! You broke my finger!" "Oh, sorry," I said through the closed window and retreated to my seat as far away from the door as possible. He started pulling hard on the door handle and rocking the car back and forth. "Open the door, kid. Do you know how long you will spend in jail for resisting a tin can?" He pulled out what looked like a baton and started banging on the roof and the window of the car. On the roof of the car and outside the window. He hit the window again, and there's a network of cracks. A network of cracks formed at the point of impact. Now I knew it was only a matter of time. I was afraid he would fulfill his promise and only make things worse. I said, "Okay," through frantic sobs, not even realizing that at that minute she was crying. He calmed down completely and said, "Okay, then get out of the car, and follow me to my car." "Yes, sir." I closed the window and got out of the car. But when he said that, a shiver ran through my body. Goosebumps ran through my body as I slowly started to follow the man. I knew something was wrong. Yes. All I could think about was that he was leading me to something indescribable behind those trees. I wanted to run, but with my clothes on, I wouldn't get far before he caught me. Where would I go if I could? We walked about halfway between the trees, 40 meters, as headlights illuminated the field where we stood. "Let's see," he roared and grabbed my arm. We were 10, maybe 15 meters from the trees when the screaming started. The headlights were now shining directly at us like celestial spotlights. Several voices, all female, shouted in our direction. "Get out of here." A man. A little girl. "That man is not a cop. He's a bad man. Let him go." "You're a demon, God." "He's looking at you, girl. Come to us and leave the bad guy behind." They were just screaming until the man let go of me and ran towards the trees. They yelled after me. I ran towards them as fast as I could and ran as fast as I could. I tore my dress in the process. 2 women, dressed in long robes, they stood at the open side doors of the old white church. They coaxed me in. I jumped into the other woman's arms and heard the door slam behind me. There were 6 women in the van, all together. All older and larger women. "It's okay, honey. You're safe. Now we're not gonna let the bad guy hurt you, okay?" None of them made me feel better. Through my tears, I told them I had to wait for the nurse, and they assured me they'd wait here and not leave the bad guy. Every once in a while they'd start yelling. To keep me from looking out the window, they held me to their chests and closed my eyes. But curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I turned away from the woman holding me, and what I saw still haunts me in my nightmares. There was a man, now completely naked. He was running on all 4s through the trees and across the field, and between us. I don't know what he was doing, but he was moving fast and a little unnaturally. Sometimes, he would come within a few feet of the van and let out the most horrible screams and roars I've ever heard. I had never heard of it. The women would try to entertain me by singing nursery rhymes and gospel songs, and each time it came too close, they'd roll down the windows and yell at him. He disappeared and reappeared like clockwork. Until finally my sister showed up with a gas tank hat in her hand and followed us down the road. I told my sister what had happened, and she said she had the worst feeling. He ran back. The women surrounded us and formed a big circle around the car. My sister filled it up with gasoline. The man stood 10 feet behind the tree line. He looked at us and was silent until we were told to leave him alone. He was told to leave us alone and not to come any closer. When the car finally started, the woman said they would pick us up to drive us home. We drove about a half mile and turned around. And as we drove past the booth, the man was on all 4s. Naked again, he sniffed the sidewalk we were stuck on. The old church. The van followed us most of the way home, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. I was afraid that if they weren't there, some villain would catch us. But when we turned onto our street, I got lost. I hid them out of sight, and they didn't turn to follow us, and I didn't see any cars crossing the intersection. Not a street. They probably just turned around and walked away. I thought my mom was waiting for us on the porch when we got there. It was clear she was crying. That was definitely my worst memory.